I'm 65 years old now. It's winter 1918. The war in Europe just ended, and I find myself thinking about another war. The one I fought 30 years ago against cold grief and my own stubborn pride. Sometimes on nights like this, when wind howls outside my window, I remember a different kind of cold. The silence that comes when a Montana blizzard stops moving. That particular quiet that means death has settled in to stay. This is the story of that winter, and the cave that taught me the difference between hiding and healing. The train brought me to Billings in September of 1887. I was James Thornwell, mining engineer for Northern Pacific Railway, and I was running from a city that had held too many ghosts. Chicago had become unbearable after Sarah died. My wife. She'd passed during childbirth the year before, and the baby a boy went with her. After that, every street corner reminded me of her. Every restaurant where we'd eaten. Every park where we'd walked. I couldn't breathe in that city anymore. So I requested a transfer. Montana Territory. As far from civilization as the railway could send me. My job was to survey limestone deposits for potential track expansion. The work was solitary, technical perfect for a man who wanted to disappear into numbers and stone. I walked the last 11 miles from Billings to Silver Creek because the stage fare would have cost me money I didn't have. Everything I owned fit into 2 canvas bags and a leather satchel full of engineering notebooks. At 34, I was 6 foot 1 shoulders broad from years of field work. Before I became an engineer, my hands were calloused from both drawing instruments and pickwork. I wore a beard in the Norwegian style my father had taught me. He'd immigrated from Norway in 1850 and never lost certain habits. People said I looked cold, distant. They were right. I wanted distance. Silver Creek wasn't much. 87 people. 1 general store, 1 church, 1 blacksmith, 1 boarding house run by a woman named Eleanor Flynn, who took 1 look at me and asked the question everyone asked newcomers. "You staying long, Mr. Thornwell?" "Depends on what the mountains tell me," I said. I rented a room and spent the first week surveying the ridge systems northwest of town. I carried a transit telescope, a clinometer, a compass, and my notebooks. I was looking for limestone formations suitable for railway construction. What I found was something else entirely. 3 miles northwest of town, along a ridge they called Granite Ridge, I discovered a cave. Now, when you're an engineer, you see the world differently. A cave isn't just a hole in the ground. It's a thermal system, a geological formation with specific properties that can be measured, calculated, understood. I stood at that cave mouth for 3 hours that first day, just observing. The opening faced south-southeast. I measured the angle with my compass. 165 degrees. That meant maximum sun exposure during short winter days. The overhang extended 14 feet from the cave mouth. I paced it off 6 times to be certain. That overhang would provide natural protection from snow and rain. The cave itself ran 40 feet deep. I counted my steps in, turned around, counted back out. 22 feet wide at the mouth, narrowing to 12 feet at the back. A natural funnel shape. At the rear wall, water trickled from a crack in the limestone. I stuck my thermometer in the flow. 52 degrees Fahrenheit. In September, with outside air, at 60, that water was cold. But it would never freeze. I knew that immediately. Spring water from 8 feet underground maintains constant temperature year-round. I pulled out my notebook and started calculating. The thermal mass of limestone is significant. Stone absorbs heat slowly and releases it slowly. The earth itself, at depths below 8 feet, maintains a constant temperature regardless of surface conditions. This cave, properly utilized, wasn't just shelter. It was a geothermal heat sink, a natural furnace that required no fuel. I sat down on a rock at the cave entrance, and for the first time in 18 months, I felt something other than emptiness. I felt the stirring of a problem that needed solving. See, I didn't come to Montana looking for a home. I came looking for oblivion, a place to disappear, to bury the grief that was crushing me. But standing in front of that cave, my engineer's mind started working again despite myself. If I could build a habitable structure inside this cave, I could prove the thermal mass principles my professor at MIT had taught 15 years ago. Principles that most frontier builders ignored because they relied on tradition instead of physics. And if I'm being honest, which I wasn't at the time, the cave offered something else. A place to bury myself alive without actually dying. Go underground, disappear from sight, Hide from the world while technically still living in it. I didn't recognize that impulse then. I do now. I filed a homestead claim the next day. The clerk at the land office pointed to a standard 160-acre plot 3 miles northwest of town. Flat land, good for farming. Are there ridge formations on the survey map? I asked. Limestone specifically. He looked confused. Most folks want flat land. I'm not most folks. I could see him trying to figure me out. Mining engineer, educated, obviously not a farmer, but also not wealthy. Everything about me said I was running from something. He showed me the map. I pointed to Granite Ridge. That's what I want. Nothing up there but rock and cougar. Perfect. Word spread fast in a town of 87 people. By the time I walked into the general store to buy supplies, 3 men were waiting to tell me I was making a mistake. Thomas Ridgefield spoke first. He was 52, weathered with the look of a man who'd survived things that killed other men. He'd homesteaded in Montana Territory since 1872, 15 years of brutal winters. And he had proof of the crime. He held up his right hand, 3 fingers, the pinky and ring finger were gone, leaving stumps that had healed poorly. You see, this engineer lost these in the blizzard of '79. You know why? Because I didn't respect the cold. You talk about building in a cave, you're talking about cold air sinks. You're building yourself an icebox. I looked at his hand, then at his face. I understand that cold air sinks in open spaces, but in an enclosed space with proper thermal mass heat is retained. The Earth at 8 feet depth maintains 50 to 55 degrees year-round, regardless of surface temperature. Man loses his wife, decides he's going to strike it rich in the goldfields. Woman loses her husband, decides she's going to run his business herself. They always fail. Reality catches up. Ellen Crawford would be no different. 5 days later, I rode past her property again. This time there was a wagon in her yard loaded with iron pipe. 400 feet of it, maybe more. I recognized those pipes. They came from the abandoned Silver Creek mine, 15 miles north. Someone had salvaged them, and Ellen Crawford had bought them. I didn't ride past this time. I stopped, dismounted, walked right up to that wagon and stood there until Ellen came out of her cabin. Mrs. Crawford, I said, keeping my voice level. What are you planning to do with these pipes? Install them, she said, like she was talking about installing curtains or a new door. Install them where? I asked. Underground, she said, 6 feet deep, in a grid pattern behind my cabin. Not if I treat the wood properly and create drainage systems, I replied. You ever done this before? No, but I've designed mine tunnels at 80% humidity. Same principles apply. Samuel scratched his beard. Mine tunnels and living spaces are different things. Physics doesn't care about the difference. Water moves downward. You just create paths for it to follow. He didn't look convinced, but I saw something shift in his expression. Skepticism mixed with professional curiosity. A craftsman recognizing another craftsman's confidence. The third man was Emil Bergson, owner of the general store. 38 years old, meticulous record keeper. He had ledgers going back 10 years, tracking every transaction in Silver Creek. Mr. Thornwell, he said carefully, I sell firewood. My business depends on people needing lots of it. If you succeed with this cave idea, you'll use less fuel. That costs me money. I appreciated his honesty. True, but if I succeed, you'll sell less wood at higher prices to people who need it. Better profit margin. He blinked. You think like a businessman. I think like an engineer. Efficiency creates value. Emil nodded slowly. I'll watch with interest. The fourth encounter was different. Joseph Crowfoot found me at the cave 3 days later. I didn't hear him approach. One moment I was alone, the next he was standing 20 feet away, watching me measure the cave mouth with string and stakes. Joseph was 50 half Crow and half French-Canadian, and he'd trapped and hunted these mountains for 30 years. He knew every cave system within 50 miles. His presence was quiet, economical. No wasted movement or words. Cougar used this cave, he said. I looked up from my measurements. I know. I saw the marks. And you're staying anyway. I'm bigger than a cougar, and I have a rifle. Joseph studied me for a long moment. You're not afraid of being alone? No. I stood up, faced him directly. I'm more afraid of crowds. Something passed between us then. Recognition. He understood. A man running from something. He didn't ask what, didn't pry, just reached into his pack and pulled out a bundle of sage and cedar bark. Burn these, cougar don't like the smell. He set them on a rock and turned to leave. Thank you, I said. He paused. Your father teach you to build? The question surprised me. Yes, how did you know? No one learns this alone. We all have teachers. He disappeared into the trees as quietly as he'd come. That bundle of sage was the first kindness anyone in Silver Creek had shown me. And coming from Joseph, it meant something. Respect from a man who didn't give it easily. October was my building month. I had 6 weeks before first snow. Most settlers would have panicked. I had a plan. First, I needed lumber. There was an abandoned claim 6 miles east. Some optimist from Ohio had hauled good pine boards all the way from Missoula, built half a cabin, then given up and fled back east. The wood was still there, weathered but sound. The problem was transportation, 6 miles one way, 12 miles round trip, and I was working alone. I designed a travois, learned the concept from a book on Native American techniques. 2 long poles cross pieces, lashed between them, the narrow end tied to my shoulders. Load capacity versus distance versus energy expenditure. I calculated it all in my notebook. 4 trips, each one 12 miles, each one carrying 300 pounds of lumber strapped to that travois. My shoulders bruised purple from the rope. My hands bled, but I didn't complain. Physical pain was clean, simple. It gave my mind something to focus on besides Sarah's face, besides the son I'd never held. The work was meditation, step after step, mile after mile. The travois creaking behind me. Each trip I recorded in my notebook. Time elapsed, load weight, fatigue level, data points, evidence. The foundation of understanding. By the end of week 2, I had enough lumber. Week 3, I started on the airlock wall. This was critical. Heat loss occurs primarily through air exchange. Build a simple door at the cave mouth, and every time you open it, warm air escapes, cold air rushes in. Thermal efficiency destroyed. The solution was a double wall system. A false wall 15 feet inside the cave mouth, creating an entry chamber. An airlock. You open the outer door, step into the chamber, close it. Then open the inner door to the living space. Cold air trapped in the airlock, never reaching the warm interior. I built the wall with double board construction. Outer boards, 11-inch cavity, inner boards. The cavity I packed with dried prairie grass mixed with clay. 11 inches of insulation. The same technique Norwegian farmhouses had used for centuries. My father taught me that. Day 1, the wall collapsed. I'd built it freestanding, relying on the base and vertical supports. But there weren't enough anchor points. Gravity won. 4 hours of work turned into kindling on the cave floor. I sat and stared at the fallen boards for an hour. My father's voice came back to me then. Not a memory exactly, more like a principle he'd drilled into me. When the solution fails, you're asking the wrong question. Look at what's already there. I looked up. The limestone walls rose on either side, natural ledges at regular intervals. Why was I fighting the stone? Why not use it? I spent the next day carving notches into the limestone ledges with chisel and hammer. Precise measurements. Level checks every 6 inches. When I was done, I had anchor points built into the cave itself. I notched the wall beams directly into those ledges. The wall became part of the cave structure instead of fighting against it. It took 6 more days, but when I finished, that wall wasn't going anywhere. The first test came on day 8. Outside temperature dropped to 28 degrees overnight. I slept behind the completed airlock, no fire, just my bedroll and the wall. I woke to my own breath not fogging. The air was cold but not biting. I checked my thermometer. 45 degrees inside, 28 outside, 17-degree difference from a wall and earth alone. The airlock worked. Thermal break established. That night I slept through without dreaming of Sarah for the first time in 18 months. Week 5, I built the living space. Elevated wooden floor, 8 inches above the cave stone to allow air circulation underneath. Moisture rot happens when wood sits directly on damp stone. Airflow prevents that. I treated every floor timber with a mixture of pine tar and beeswax. Learned that from a Danish shipwright in Chicago. The wood would shed water like a duck's back. The walls I built only 5 feet high angled inward to meet the natural cave ceiling. Every foot of wall surface represents heat loss. Less surface area equals less loss. Simple geometry. The ceiling beams I notched directly into limestone ledges, same technique as the airlock wall. Load distribution calculated for snow weight, timber weight, safety margin. No vertical supports needed. The cave held the structure. Living space dimensions 14 feet deep, 11 feet wide, 6-foot ceiling at the center point. Small. Most people would call it cramped. I called it thermally efficient. The stove was my masterpiece. I bought the smallest model available in Billings. A shepherd's stove, 16 inches square, designed for sheep herder wagons. The clerk tried to talk me into something bigger. That won't heat much space, mister. It'll heat exactly the space I need. Size doesn't matter, placement does. I positioned that stove against the cave's rear wall where the limestone thermal mass was greatest. Every BTU that stove generated would be absorbed by tons of surrounding rock and radiated back slowly over hours. I built a hood to capture the smoke, directed it through a 6-inch pipe that ran along the ceiling and out through a carefully sealed opening near the cave mouth. The draft was perfect. Hot air rises, pulls fresh air, and smoke exits clean. First test 6 pounds of wood. Temperature climbed from 58 to 65 degrees in 20 minutes. Fire died after an hour. Temperature stayed at 60 degrees for 3 more hours. 1/10 the wood Thomas Ridgefield burned in his cabin. 1/10. I wrote in my notebook that night, system functional, thermal mass hypothesis confirmed. Earth maintains baseline warmth. Fire supplements. Mathematics validated. But I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired and still empty. November brought the first real tests. Outside, temperatures dropped to 15 degrees and stayed there for a week. Inside my cave, with no fire burning, the temperature held at 58 degrees. The thermal mass effect was working exactly as calculated. When I did light the stove for cooking, the temperature climbed to 68 within 20 minutes and stayed there for 3 hours after the fire died. The town noticed. I'd walk into Silver Creek every 3 or 4 days for supplies. People would stare. By mid-November, I looked healthier than most of them. My skin had color. I wasn't pale and drawn like the townspeople who spent all their time huddled near stoves in drafty cabins, breathing smoke. I'd overhear conversations at Emil's store. Thomas Ridgefield, the engineer's still alive. I'll give him that. Samuel Clark. Saw him yesterday, looked better than most of us. Emil. His firewood purchases are 1/10 of yours, Thomas. But I didn't engage. I'd buy my supplies and I'd politely leave. Results spoke louder than words. And honestly, I still wanted solitude. The cave was working, but I was still using it to hide. The moisture problem appeared in week 2 of November. I woke to find condensation on the inner wall near the entrance. For a moment, panic touched me. Samuel had been right. Limestone sweats, rot would follow. Then my training took over. Observe, measure, understand. The condensation was only near the entrance, not deeper in the cave. I measured temperature differential. Entrance wall 42 degrees, back wall 56 degrees, warm cave air meeting cold entrance surface. Condensation. Solution drainage. I spent 2 days carving shallow channels into the stone floor with chisel and hammer. Gravity drainage channels sloping toward a sump pit near the entrance. 1:12 ratio. Water follows the path you give it. The condensation drained, no pooling, no rot. Problem solved. But the mountain lion problem was different. I was returning from town one evening late November when I saw fresh tracks in the snow. Large tracks, paw prints the size of my palm. I followed them with my eyes and saw they led directly to my cave entrance. I rounded the last turn in the path, and there it was. A mountain lion, standing 15 feet from my door. We locked eyes. Time slowed. My heart beat in my ears. The cougar's muscles coiled, ready to spring or flee. Those amber eyes, calculating. Predator mathematics. Threat assessment. Fight or flight. I'd faced cave-ins at 200 feet underground. I'd pulled men from collapsed mine shafts with tons of rock groaning above us. I'd walked through neighborhoods where cholera was killing people by the dozen. I didn't panic. Slowly, I lowered my pack. Slowly, I reached inside for the bundle of sage and cedar bark Joseph had given me. Slowly, I pulled out my matches. The lion watched every movement. I struck a match, lit the cedar bark. Smoke rose thick and pungent. The scent, Joseph said, cougars hate. The big cat's nose wrinkled, ears flattened. It took one step back, then another. Then it turned and disappeared into the trees. I stood there shaking, not from fear exactly, from adrenaline, from the sudden rush of feeling alive. For the first time since Sarah's death, I felt present, here, now, in this moment, not drowning in grief, not hiding from memory, just alive, defending territory, asserting my right to exist in this place. I walked into the cave and sat down on my bed. My hands were trembling. I looked at them like they belonged to someone else. Maybe I can survive here, I said out loud to the empty cave. Not just physically, but actually live. It was the first honest thing I'd said to myself in over a year. December brought harder cold, 0, then -10, then -18. The temperature dropped over 2 weeks and stayed low. Emil's records showed firewood sales running 40% higher than the previous winter. Up on Granite Ridge, I was comfortable. My routine had settled into rhythm. Wake at dawn, start a small fire, coffee and oatmeal, let the stove die down. The cave held heat so well I didn't need to relight until evening. I spent my days reading engineering manuals, sketching improvement ideas, thinking, and every few days walking to town. I noticed things. Thomas Ridgefield looked exhausted. His wife Martha was coughing, probably from smoke inhalation. Their firewood pile was shrinking fast. Samuel Clark's family was burning through supplies faster than expected. Even Emil, who sold the firewood, looked worried. High sales meant people were struggling to stay warm. But I kept quiet. I wasn't there to prove anything. I'd built the cave for myself, for escape. The fact that it worked was almost incidental. Then came Christmas Eve. I hadn't planned to attend the church service. I wasn't religious, didn't feel like part of the community, preferred solitude. But Joseph Crowfoot appeared at my cave that afternoon. Town has a service tonight. You should come. I'm not much for church, Joseph. Not about church, about community. You're part of Silver Creek now. They need to see that. Why do they need to see anything? Joseph looked at me with those dark, knowing eyes. Because respect is earned in presence, not absence. You've proven something. Now show them you're still human. So I went. The church was small, all 87 residents packed inside. A wood stove in the corner, struggling to heat the space. Everyone bundled in coats, even indoors, their breath fogging. I walked in wearing just my wool coat, no layers underneath. I'd walked 3 miles in -10-degree weather, and I wasn't cold. People noticed. Eleanor Flynn, who ran the boarding house, approached me after the service. The woman who'd questioned how long I'd stay, who'd worried about the impropriety of a man alone in the wilderness. Mr. Thornwell, I owe you an apology. For what, Mrs. Flynn? I thought you'd die in that cave. I was wrong. You had reason to worry. Most people would have been right. But you weren't most people. She paused. Are you happy up there alone? The question surprised me. I had to think about it. I'm not alone, I finally said. The earth keeps me company. She didn't understand, but she respected the answer. Then Thomas Ridgefield approached. This was harder for him. Alpha males don't admit error easily, but he was desperate enough to try. Thornwell, can I ask you something? Go ahead. How much wood do you burn daily? 6 pounds, 8 on very cold days. His face went pale. I burned 60. Silence stretched between us. Everything in that number. His struggle, his family's suffering, the validation of my approach, the cost of his pride. You're heating space you don't use, I said quietly, and fighting the cold instead of managing it. Could you? He swallowed hard. Would you show me how you did it? This was the moment. I could refuse. Hold my knowledge close. Prove my superiority. Make him beg. Or I could do what my father taught me. What engineering school taught me. What Sarah would have wanted. Come visit after Christmas. I'll explain what my father taught me. Thomas's 3-fingered hand trembled slightly. Relief, humility, hope. Thank you. Other conversations followed. Samuel asking about moisture management. A young couple asking if I could advise on their spring building plans. Doc Hensley wanting to understand the health implications of thermal efficiency. I walked home that night carrying cookies from Eleanor, carrying questions from Samuel, carrying something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. The 3-mile walk back to the cave stars brilliant overhead, -12 degrees. I wasn't cold. The wool coat was enough. My cave was waiting. Warm, dark, silent. I entered through the airlock, closed the outer door, opened the inner door. The temperature difference hit me like a wave, from -12 to 58 degrees in 2 steps. I sat on my bed and looked around. Small space, efficient, perfect. And for the first time, it felt like more than refuge. It felt like home. I pulled out my notebook and wrote the date, January 1st, 1888. New Year, the town is warming to me, or I'm warming to them, not sure which. Temperatures have been mild. Emil says 30% warmer than last year average. Too mild. Animals are behaving strangely. Ravens left early, deer moving to low ground, barometric pressure falling fast. Joseph says storm coming. Big one. I can feel it too. The earth is bracing. I looked at that last line for a long time. Then I added one more sentence. For the first time since Sarah died, I care whether others survive what's coming. I closed the notebook, put out the lamp, lay back in the darkness. The cave was silent, warm, waiting. And somewhere to the northwest, beyond the ridge, beyond the mountains, a pressure system was gathering that would change everything. The barometer started falling on January 18th, zero point 0.4 inches in 6 hours. That's not weather, that's catastrophe building. I stood at my cave entrance that morning, watching the sky. High clouds moving fast from the northwest. The kind of clouds that mean a storm front the size of 3 states. Temperature was 20 degrees, unseasonably warm for mid-January. People in town were probably relaxing, thinking maybe this would be an easy winter after all. They didn't understand what I understood, what the animals understood. Warmth before a winter storm is a trap. The atmosphere gathering energy, pressure differentials creating a vacuum that pulls Arctic air south like water down a drain. The bigger the differential, the more violent the equalization. This was going to be violent. I spent that day preparing. Check my firewood stores. 2 cords stacked inside the cave dry and ready. Check food supplies in the root cellar. 60 pounds of potatoes, 30 pounds of carrots, dried beans, salt pork, smoked venison. Water unlimited from the spring. I filled every container I had. Then I sealed gaps. Every tiny crack in the airlock wall, every space around the stovepipe. I mixed clay and grass fiber into paste and worked it into seams with my fingers. Engineering isn't just about the big design, it's about the details, the small failures that cascade into catastrophic ones. By evening, the temperature had dropped to 5 degrees. The wind picked up, and I knew. I wrote in my notebook, storm arriving, town unprepared. I've done what I can for myself. Nothing I can do for them. Not yet. That night, I barely slept. The blizzard hit just after midnight on January 20th. I woke to a sound like freight trains. Wind hammering the ridge. Snow so thick I couldn't see 5 feet past the cave entrance. I checked my thermometer. Outside, -15 and falling. Inside, 56 degrees. No fire burning. The system was holding. By dawn, -22. By noon, -31. Wind speed steady at 40 miles per hour. The kind of wind that freezes exposed skin in 60 seconds. The kind that kills. I ventured outside once just to check the cave entrance. The overhang was working perfectly. 14 feet of limestone protecting the opening. Snow was piling up everywhere else, but the entrance remained clear. Just needed lights shoveling to maintain air circulation. I stepped beyond the overhang for 30 seconds, just to understand what the town was experiencing. The wind hit like a physical blow. Ice crystals drove into my face like needles. My lungs seized. The air was so cold it burned to breathe. 30 seconds and my face went numb. 60 seconds and I'd have been in serious trouble. I retreated into the cave, closed the outer airlock door, stood in the entry chamber catching my breath, opened the inner door to the living space. Warm air enveloped me. 58 degrees, like stepping into a different world. That's when the guilt started. I was comfortable, safe. The cave was performing exactly as designed. But 3 miles away, 87 people were burning through their winter fuel supplies in a desperate fight against cold that wouldn't quit. And I couldn't help them. Not yet. Not in this. The wind died on the afternoon of day one. That's when I knew they were in real trouble. See, most people think wind stopping during a blizzard is good news. It means the storm is passing, but that's not how stalled pressure systems work. When a storm this big stops moving, it's not passing. It's settling, digging in, trapped between high pressure zones to the east and west. It's going to sit there and dump snow until it runs out of moisture. These storms could last 5 days, 7, sometimes 10. By nightfall of day one, snow depth was 28 inches, temperature negative 35. And the silence was absolute. I sat in my cave that night, comfortable in my single wool shirt, eating a simple dinner of salt pork and beans. The stove burned at small fire, 6 pounds of wood. The cave held at 65 degrees, and I thought about Thomas Ridgefield burning 60 pounds to stay barely warm, about the Hendrickson family with 3 kids under 6, about old Robert Crawford and his wife in their poorly insulated cabin. I wrote in my notebook, "They're suffering, I could help, but the distance is impossible. If I die trying to reach them, I help no one. Logic says wait. Conscience says otherwise. Logic wins, for now." Day 2 brought the real problems, though I didn't know it yet. Snow depth hit 41 inches by morning. Temperature negative 37. I maintained my routine. Small fire for breakfast. Coffee and oatmeal. Let it die down. The cave held heat for hours. I spent the day reading, thinking, calculating how long my supplies would last if this went on for weeks. The math was comfortable. I had margin. Lots of it. But 3 miles away, Thomas Ridgefield's chimney was cracking from thermal stress. Rapid temperature changes causing the mortar to fail. Smoke backing into his cabin. He had to choose between a big fire and suffocation or a small fire and freezing. He chose small fire. Barely enough to survive. Martha was coughing badly now, eyes burning from the smoke that did get through. The Hendrickson family was burning through wood twice as fast as planned. William Hendrickson stood in his cabin doing mathematics in his head. 3 more days of fuel at current burn rate. After that, they'd have to burn furniture. After that, he didn't know. Their youngest, Abigail, 4 years old, was already showing signs of cold stress. Not hypothermia yet, but the pallor, the listlessness. The scary quiet that comes when a child's body starts shutting down non-essential functions to preserve core temperature. Samuel Clark tried to reach the lumberyard, made it 50 feet from his door before his lungs started burning from the frozen air. Had to crawl back. His wife Bridget was crying. "We're going to D." He wanted to say no, but he wasn't sure anymore. I didn't know any of this. I was isolated, comfortable, blind to their suffering. That's the terrible thing about isolation. It protects you from danger, but it also blinds you to the needs of others. I'd built the cave to escape, to hide, and it was working too well. Day 3, snow depth 47 inches, temperature negative 38. That morning, Robert Crawford made a mistake that almost cost him his feet. He needed firewood from the outdoor shed, 40 feet from his cabin door, normally a 30-second trip, but in 4 feet of snow at negative 38 degrees, it took him 20 minutes. His boots were old, not insulated well. By the time he got back inside with an armload of wood, he couldn't feel his feet. His wife Helen pulled off his boots, and both of them stared in horror at his toes. Black, no feeling. The flesh had frozen solid. Doc Hensley came as fast as he could, examined the feet, shook his head. "I've seen this before, Robert. In this cold, with no way to keep wounds clean, infection is almost certain. You're going to lose those toes, maybe the feet entirely." Helen Crawford started sobbing. Robert just stared at the wall. He was 71 years old. Without feet in Montana territory, he might as well be dead. The Hendrickson family burned their dining table that afternoon. William had built it himself 5 years ago. His grandfather had taught him woodworking. It was the nicest piece of furniture they owned. Sarah Hendrickson begged him not to. "Please, not the table." William looked at his daughter Abigail, pale, quiet, cold. "Table or Abigail? You choose." Sarah stopped arguing. The table burned fast. Unseasoned wood gave them heat for 2 hours. Then nothing. That evening, Sarah asked the question William had been avoiding. What do we burn tomorrow? He had no answer. By evening of day 3, the town understood they were in a crisis. Emil Bergson opened his store for 2 hours at midday, tried to coordinate resources. Families with extra blankets shared with those who didn't. Families with spare rooms took in families who'd run out of fuel. But the mathematics were becoming brutally clear. At current burn rates, the town had maybe 2 more days of fuel. After that, people would start dying. Eleanor Flynn stood in her boarding house surrounded by huddled families and said what everyone was thinking but nobody wanted to voice. Someone should check on the engineer. On Mr. Thornwell, he's been up there alone for 4 days. He's probably frozen by now. The room went quiet. Then Thomas Ridgefield spoke. He's dead. Has to be. Alone in a cave in this. But Eleanor kept thinking, remembering. The engineer at Christmas. Healthy. Warm. That thin smoke from his stovepipe. The confidence in his eyes. What if he's not, she said quietly. What if his cave actually works? What if he's the only one who's not dying? Nobody wanted to hope. Hope was dangerous, but the seed was planted. Joseph Crowfoot volunteered immediately. He was the only one with the skill and equipment to make the climb. Snowshoes, emergency sled, medical supplies, rope. He'd pulled people from worse situations. He left at first light on day 4. The climb that normally took 40 minutes took nearly 3 hours. Breaking trail through waist-deep snow, even with snowshoes. The temperature was -39. His lungs burned with every breath. Ice formed in his beard. His fingers went numb inside his gloves. He kept thinking Thornwell is dead. Has to be. No one survives alone in this. But another thought pushed him forward. If anyone could, it's him. The engineer. The one who doesn't panic. Who calculates instead of fears. As he climbed higher, doubt crept in. What would he find? A frozen corpse? A collapsed cave, maybe just emptiness. Maybe Thornwell had tried to reach town and died somewhere between. He crested the final rise and looked toward the cave entrance, and stopped. The entrance was clear, completely clear. The overhang had protected it from snow, and there were fresh shovel marks. Someone had been maintaining the area, keeping air circulation open. Smoke rose from the stovepipe, thin, steady, the kind of smoke that comes from a small, efficient fire. Joseph stood there staring, his mind trying to process what his eyes were seeing. He's alive. God Almighty, he's alive. He approached slowly, called out, Thornwell, James Thornwell. A pause, then the door opened, and there stood James Thornwell, clean, healthy, wearing a single wool sweater, reading glasses perched on his nose like he'd been interrupted from a book. He looked genuinely surprised. Joseph, is everything all right in town? Joseph couldn't speak for a moment, just stared. Then he laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. Can I come in? Of course. The interior hit Joseph like a revelation. The temperature, the organization, the impossible reality of 64 degrees. He could feel it the moment he stepped through the inner airlock door. Warm air, not hot, not stifling, just comfortably warm, like a well-heated house in normal winter. The small stove glowed with a modest fire. The walls were dry, no ice, no condensation, no moisture dripping. The air was fresh, the ventilation system working perfectly. Everything had a place. Firewood stacked neatly, food stores organized in the root cellar, water bucket filled from the spring, engineering notebooks on a small table next to an open book, a coffee pot warming on the stove. This wasn't survival. This was living. Joseph walked the space slowly, examining, his trapper's eye missing nothing. The drainage channels carved into the floor, the treated timbers showing no rot, the insulated airlock wall, the stove positioned precisely where thermal mass would be maximized. How much wood have you burned? He finally asked. Maybe 30 pounds. Over 4 days. I've been keeping the fire small. Same principles I explained to Thomas months ago. The earth does most of the work. 30 pounds? Thomas Ridgefield had burned 400 trying to heat his drafty cabin. The mathematics were staggering. The town is in trouble, Joseph said quietly. He explained. The fuel shortage, Robert Crawford's frostbite, families burning furniture, children showing signs of hypothermia, the desperation. James's face changed as Joseph talked. The engineer's calm cracked, something human showing through. How many people are in danger? 30, maybe more. James looked around his cave, calculating, the engineer's mind already solving the problem. How many can we fit in here? They worked it out quickly. The cave was 14 feet by 11 feet, 154 square feet, with 12 people about 13 square feet per person. Tight, very tight, but manageable. James had food for 3 days if rationed carefully. The water was unlimited. And the thermal load calculation, 12 people would generate more body heat and require more air exchange. But he estimated 50 pounds of wood per day would maintain temperature. Still far less than what the town was collectively burning. Bring them, James said. Start with the most desperate. Children, injured, people who won't survive another night. Joseph looked at him. Really looked. You're going to save us. James shook his head. I'm applying thermodynamics. It's what I do. But inside something was shifting. A voice that sounded like Sarah. This is why you're still here. Not to hide. To serve. Joseph made the trip back in 2 hours. Adrenaline and hope driving him. He burst into town and went straight to Emil's store where people had gathered. Thornwell is alive. The cave is warm. He has room. Disbelief. Shame from those who'd mocked. Relief. Desperate hope. They chose the first 6 carefully. The Hendrickson family had all 5 of them. Robert Crawford and his wife Helen. The most desperate. The most in danger. They bundled in every piece of clothing they owned. Joseph led. Emil provided emergency supplies. And they started the nightmare journey. 2 hours through hell. Temperature -38. Wind picking up again in gusts. Snow waist deep. Joseph carrying Abigail, who'd gone silent and pale. The scary kind of silent that means a body is shutting down. William and Sarah stumbling. Terrified. Robert on the emergency sled, unable to walk on his frostbitten feet. Helen helping pull. Halfway there, William fell. Sarah screamed. Joseph shouted, "Keep moving. You stop, you die." Abigail's eyes were closing, her breathing shallow. "Stay awake, little one," Joseph whispered. "Almost there. Almost warm." They crested the ridge, the cave entrance ahead, and standing in the doorway backlit by warm light was James Thornwell. "Get them inside, now." The transformation was immediate. First 10 minutes shaking uncontrollably, teeth chattering, couldn't speak, just animal sounds of distress. 20 minutes color starting to return to faces. The violent shaking subsiding. 30 minutes able to remove outer layers without help. 45 minutes Abigail Hendrickson opened her eyes and whispered, "I'm warm." Sarah Hendrickson broke down, sobbing, not from fear anymore, from relief, from the sudden release of 4 days of terror. She grabbed James and held on. He stood there awkwardly, not good with physical emotion. But he didn't pull away. "You're safe," he said quietly. "The cave has you. You saved my baby. Thermal mass saved her. I just built the room." But he knew that wasn't quite true. For the first time since Sarah's death, his engineering had directly saved a life. Not in theory, not in abstract. Right here. This child. Breathing, warming, living. Joseph made 3 more trips over the next 18 hours. Each time bringing more people. By the evening of day 514 people sheltered in James's cave. It should have been chaos. 14 people in 154 square feet. Cramped, tense, uncomfortable. Instead, it was the warmest, safest place in 200 miles. James organized it like an engineering project. Sleeping rotations. Everyone got 4 hours lying down. Children in the warmest spot near the back wall. Robert Crawford and the elderly closest to the stove. Adults in shifts. Food rationing. A pot of soup constantly rotating. Small portions, but consistent. Children ate first. James ate last. Sanitation. A bucket system outside the entrance. Rotations for trips. Privacy maintained. Dignity preserved. The thermal calculations held. 14 people more body heat, but also more moisture and air exchange needed. James kept the fire slightly larger, 50 pounds of wood per day. The cave maintained 60 to 62 degrees. Everyone was comfortable. That evening, Thomas Ridgefield sat near the stove. Not because he needed to. The whole cave was warm, just from habit. He ran his three-fingered hand along the limestone wall, feeling the stone that was keeping them alive. I was wrong, he said finally. Dead wrong. I've been building cabins for 15 years and never thought to work with the earth instead of against it. James looked at him. You couldn't know what you weren't taught. My father taught me, from Norway. Different tradition. Pride cost me these fingers. Thomas held up the stumps. Almost cost me everything else. Pride didn't cost you fingers, James said firmly. Ignorance did. There's a difference. Pride is refusing to learn after you know better. You're learning now. That's not pride. That's intelligence. Something passed between them. Male respect. Hard-earned. Samuel Clark was studying everything. The drainage channels, the insulation technique, the beam notches, taking measurements with string, memorizing. This is better engineering than most houses in Silver Creek. You've thought of everything. I didn't think of everything, James replied. The earth did, I just listened. Will you teach me, not just the cave, but how to listen? James hesitated. I'm not a teacher. You are now. The children played quietly in the back of the cave, making shadow puppets on the limestone wall. Abigail, James, Emma. Their laughter was soft, careful, but it was there. The adults stopped talking and listened. For the first time in 5 days, children laughing. The sound of future. The sound of hope. Eleanor Flynn watched James organize 14 people in a space the size of a bedroom. Calm, efficient, no panic. Every person cared for, every need anticipated. She approached him during a quiet moment. You were meant for this life. I see that now. James shook his head. I wasn't meant for it. I chose it. There's a difference. Why did you choose it? He was quiet for a long time. Then I came here to bury grief, to disappear. But the earth wouldn't let me disappear. It held me, kept me alive. And then it gave me this. Purpose, your wife. He nodded, unable to speak. Eleanor touched his arm gently. She'd be proud. That night, late, everyone sleeping, James sat alone with his thoughts. The cave was silent except for breathing. 14 people. Warm, safe, alive. Grace Morrison, the 65-year-old widow, woke and saw him sitting there, saw the tears on his face. Mr. Thornwell, she whispered. He wiped his eyes quickly. I'm fine, Mrs. Morrison. No, you're not, but you will be. You saved us. Now let us save you back. He didn't understand what she meant. Not then. Day 6 dawned with change. The temperature climbed to -12, practically balmy compared to the previous days. The snow stopped falling, started settling, compacting. By afternoon, pathways were becoming passable. Over the next day, people made their way back to their homes, carrying with them something more than survival, carrying understanding, proof, a new way of seeing the world. The Hendricksons left first. Sarah hugged James. You saved my babies. The cave saved them. I just opened the door. Abigail handed him a drawing she'd made. Stick figures. A kito, a heart. James looked at it for a long time, then carefully folded it and put it in his notebook. The first personal item he'd kept since Sarah's death. Thomas extended his three-fingered hand. James shook it. I'm rebuilding my cabin this summer. Will you help me? I'll share what I know. That's all I ask. Samuel was last to leave. I want to document this, everything, so others can learn. Will you work with me? James nodded slowly. Yes, that's a good idea. Robert Crawford's feet were examined by Doc Hensley at the cave. The toes were still black, but the infection hadn't spread. The warmth and the poultices James had applied, comfrey root and honey and yarrow, a Norwegian remedy his father taught him, had prevented the worst. One more day in his cabin and he'd have lost both feet, Doc said. Guaranteed. What was in those poultices? Old knowledge, from people who couldn't afford to make mistakes. After they all left, James stood alone in his cave. The sudden silence was profound. After 5 days of 14 people, the space felt enormous. He looked around, at the walls he'd built, the stove he'd placed, the systems he'd designed. It had all worked, better than he'd calculated. The mathematics had been validated, but more than that, something else had happened. Something he hadn't designed for. He'd helped, he'd served, he'd used his knowledge not for escape, but for purpose. The cave didn't feel like a hiding place anymore. It felt like a home and a proof. He pulled out his notebook and wrote, Day 6, storm breaking. Everyone survived. Cave performed beyond expectations. But the real discovery wasn't thermodynamics. It was this: engineering isn't about buildings, it's about serving people. Father tried to teach me that. Sarah knew it. I forgot. Now I remember. He looked at Abigail's drawing again. The stick figure cave, the heart. Outside, the storm was clearing. Inside, something had shifted. The engineer who came to Montana to bury himself had found instead a reason to live. And 3 miles away in Silver Creek, conversations were starting, plans forming. A town beginning to understand that the crazy engineer in the cave might know something they desperately needed to learn. Winter wasn't over, but everything had changed. Spring came late to Montana in 1888. The snow didn't really start melting until mid-March, and by then, Silver Creek had become a different kind of town. Thomas Ridgefield was the first to act. 2 weeks after the blizzard ended, he showed up at my cave with Samuel Clark and a notebook full of questions. "We want to rebuild," Thomas said. "Not just my cabin. We want to do it right this time." I looked at them standing in my cave entrance. 2 men who'd questioned my sanity 6 months ago, now asking for help. "Come in," I said. We spent 6 hours that day going over principles. I didn't have formal drawings, hadn't planned to teach anyone. But Samuel was a quick study, and Thomas, despite his pride, listened like a man who'd learned the cost of ignorance. I walked them through the same fundamentals the cave had proven. Numbers don't lie when you test them against Montana winter. Not just theory anymore. Proof. Samuel documented everything. Drew sketches, asked technical questions about ratios and measurements. His stonemason's mind grasped the principles instantly. "This isn't new, is it?" he said at one point. "No, people have built this way for thousands of years. We just forgot, got arrogant, thought we could fight nature with brute force instead of working with it." Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I want to show you something." He held up his 3-fingered hand. "I got these stumps by fighting, by being too stubborn to respect what I didn't understand. I'm done fighting. Teach me to work with the earth instead of against it. It's going to mean demolishing parts of your cabin. I don't care. My wife deserves to breathe clean air. My family deserves to be warm without burning our future." We shook hands, 3 fingers gripping 5, an agreement between men who'd learned humility the hard way. Over the next 3 months, Samuel and I created something neither of us planned: a building manual, documentation of earth shelter principles specific to Montana conditions. We built a scale model first, right there in my cave, quarter-size replica using the same materials and techniques. We could test it, measure temperature differentials, prove the concepts before applying them full scale. Word spread. By April, people started visiting, not just from Silver Creek, but from neighboring settlements. They'd heard stories about the town that survived the killer blizzard with 0 deaths, about the engineer's cave that saved 14 people. I hated the attention, told Samuel to handle the visitors. I wasn't a showman, wasn't interested in fame, just wanted to solve problems. But Samuel insisted. They need to see it working. They need to touch the walls and feel the temperature. Seeing is believing for most people. So I let them come, gave short explanations, answered technical questions, showed the drainage channels and insulation techniques and stove placement. Let them stand in 60-degree comfort while outside temperature was 40. Some left skeptical, others left converted. A few left angry, insulted that some outsider was telling them their grandfather's building methods were wrong. I didn't care about the angry ones. You can't teach people who don't want to learn. By summer 7, families in Silver Creek were building earth-sheltered homes. Thomas's rebuild was first. We partially demolished his existing cabin, kept the south-facing wall, bermed the north side with 3 feet of packed earth and sod. lowered the ceiling from 7 feet to 5.5, reduced interior volume by 40%, but increased thermal efficiency by 70%. Samuel supervised the stonework. I advised on thermal design. The community helped with labor debts repaid from the blizzard. The results spoke louder than any argument. Thomas's first winter in the rebuilt cabin, 1888 to 89, he burned 1.5 cords of wood, down from 4 cords the previous winter. 62% reduction. His family stayed healthier because they weren't breathing smoke constantly. Martha's cough disappeared entirely. One cold December evening, Thomas walked up to my cave unannounced. I opened the door and found him standing there with tears in his eyes. "I can afford food now," he said. "Real food, not just what we can grow, because I'm not spending everything on firewood. My children are eating better, and it's because you taught me to stop being stubborn." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just invited him in for coffee. We sat in silence for a while. Then he said something I've never forgotten. "You know what the hardest part was? Admitting I'd been wrong for 15 years. That I'd made my family suffer because I was too proud to question what I thought I knew. These fingers," he held up the stumps. "I blamed the cold, blamed bad luck, never blamed my own ignorance. That's what you taught me. The difference between bad luck and bad design." The young couple, David and Ann Porter, built a fully underground home that summer. 22 years old, newly married, they had almost no money but plenty of energy. Their design was the most radical, completely below grade, except for the south-facing entrance, built into a hillside with 4 feet of earth cover on the roof. People said it looked like a grave. They didn't care. They couldn't afford to care. I spent 3 days on site helping them understand drainage and ventilation. Critical factors when you go fully underground. Water flows downhill. If you don't channel it, it pools. If it pools, you drown. But done right, an underground home is the most thermally stable structure you can build. Ground temperature at that depth never varies more than 5 degrees year-round. The Porter's home stayed 60 degrees in winter with minimal heating, stayed 68 degrees in summer with no cooling. Their fuel costs were 1/10 of conventional cabins. Samuel Clark built his own place that summer too. Professional pride wouldn't let him rely on anyone else's work. Half-buried design with stone facing, beautiful craftsmanship. But more than that, it was proof. A master stonemason validating earth contact construction. His endorsement meant more than mine to a lot of people. By fall of 1888, Silver Creek had 23 earth-sheltered structures in various stages of completion. The town was transforming. Not just physically, but culturally. Travelers started noticing. A mining engineer from Butte came through in June, saw the construction, demanded explanations. Toured my cave, left shaking his head. "This works in Montana winter, I need to tell people." A journalist from Helena showed up in August. Wanted to write about the underground town. Interviewed me, Thomas Samuel. I hated every minute of it, but recognized the value. Information needed to spread. The article published in September. Silver Creek's engineering revolution. It brought letters, dozens of them, settlers from across the territory asking for details, measurements, advice. I answered them all. Not because I wanted recognition, because people were dying from cold every winter and I had knowledge that could prevent it. Emil Bergson's meticulous records told an interesting story. Winter of 1888 to 89 versus winter of 1887 to 88. Firewood sales down 45%. Food purchases up 30% because people had money freed from fuel costs. Medical visits for cold-related illness down 60%. Most striking, infant mortality, 0. The previous winter, 2 babies had died. Cold-related complications. This winter, 0. Numbers don't lie. The earth shelter approach wasn't just more comfortable. It was saving lives in ways that went beyond the obvious. But not everyone converted. About 40% of the town stuck with traditional cabins. Some improved their insulation based on Samuel's recommendations. Some didn't change anything. Pride, tradition, the stubborn belief that what worked for their fathers should work for them. I didn't try to convince them. Results would convince, or they wouldn't. Not my job to evangelize. Then came the winter of 1889 to 90. The winter that would be talked about for the next 50 years. The winter that proved everything. If the blizzard of 1888 was a test, the winter of 1889 to 90 was an execution. It started in December, with temperatures dropping to -25 and staying there. By early January, we were seeing -40, sustained for days at a time. January 12th hit -48, a record, the kind of cold that kills livestock in their barns, the kind that makes split wood shatter like glass. Across Montana Territory, settlements were dying. Fort Benton reported 12 deaths by mid-January. Great Falls was being abandoned. People in Billings were burning buildings for fuel. Helena declared martial law to ration supplies. In Silver Creek, we were managing. The earth-sheltered homes maintained interior temperatures of 55 to 60 degrees with minimal fire. Fuel consumption was 70% less than traditional cabins. Residents were healthy, warm, relatively comfortable. The improved traditional cabins, the ones with better insulation, based on Samuel's work, they were struggling but survivable. 40% fuel reduction meant they had enough to make it through. But the unchanged traditional cabins, the holdouts who'd refused to adapt, they were in crisis. One family, the Johnsons, had been particularly vocal about earth shelters being unnatural. Like living in a grave, the patriarch had said. His pride was immense. His cabin was old style, drafty, inefficient. By January 18th, they were out of fuel. Their children were showing signs of hypothermia. Real hypothermia, blue lips, confusion, the shutdown that precedes death. Johnson showed up at my cave at dawn, a proud man on his knees. "Please, I was wrong. My children are dying. Please help." I didn't hesitate, didn't lecture, didn't say I told you so. Just opened my door. "Bring them, now." His whole family sheltered with me for 3 days while the worst of the cold passed. When they left, Johnson was crying. "I nearly killed them, my own children, because I was too proud to listen." "You listened when it mattered," I said. "That takes more courage than being right from the start." But not everyone was that lucky. The O'Brien family, Irish traditionalists who'd survived brutal winters in the old country and thought Montana would be the same, they didn't ask for help in time. Their eldest son lost 3 toes to frostbite, severe enough that Doc Hensley had to amputate. The earth-sheltered families shared their surplus fuel with struggling neighbors, rotating shelter on the worst nights. Not because I told them to, because the blizzard of 1888 had taught them something more important than thermodynamics: community, mutual aid, the understanding that survival is collective. I'd designed the cave for individual escape, but the town had learned to use the principle for collective resilience. When spring finally came in March of 1890, Montana Territory was devastated. Entire settlements abandoned. Hundreds dead. 60% livestock loss. Economic catastrophe. Silver Creek, 0 human deaths. 3 cases of frostbite, all recovered. 40% livestock loss, which was bad but manageable. The territorial government sent an investigation team. How had we survived when towns with twice our resources had failed? They toured the earth-sheltered homes, examined the construction, took measurements, interviewed residents. Their official report recommended earth contact architecture for all new Montana settlements. I refused to testify, told them to talk to Thomas and Samuel. I wasn't interested in government recognition, but I did agree to one thing. A university engineer from the Montana College of Mining came to study the thermal properties scientifically. Spent a week taking measurements, published a paper validating everything. The scientific establishment confirmed what Norwegian farmers had known for centuries. Earth contact construction works. The math is undeniable. I started traveling after that. Not because I wanted to, but because people needed help, and I had knowledge they didn't. Montana, Wyoming, Dakota Territory. I'd ride out to a homestead, assess the site, draw up recommendations. Ride back. Over 13 years, I rode across 3 territories, helping 42 families build smarter. 2 projects stay with me. The first was a wealthy Wyoming cattleman in 1893. He wanted grandeur. I wanted efficiency. We fought for 3 days. "This house represents my success," he insisted. "This house will determine whether you survive the next killer winter," I replied. We compromised. Stone-facing timber details beauty that satisfied his pride, but underneath pure physics. 4 feet of earth-bermed north walls, south-facing glass, ventilation that moved air without losing heat. It became a showcase. Proof that earth shelter didn't mean poverty. It meant intelligence. The second was an opposite. Dakota Territory, 1895. A widow with 2 children and $40 total. She'd lost her husband to pneumonia the previous winter. Their cabin had killed him as surely as the disease. I designed the simplest structure I could. Hillside excavation, minimal lumber, mostly earth and stone and sweat. She and her boys dug it by hand over 3 weeks. That $40 investment gave her children warmth their father never had. She wrote me 5 years later. Both boys healthy, grown strong. The house you taught us to build saved us, she said. 42 families, rich and poor. Everyone survived winters that killed their neighbors. I kept living in my cave until 1903, 16 years. People asked why I didn't build something bigger, more comfortable. The truth was simple. The cave was home. It worked. Why leave? But at 50, I had to admit age was catching up. The climb from town was getting harder. The isolation was less appealing. I'd saved enough to build a small house in Silver Creek proper. Earth-bermed, efficient, but above ground and closer to people. Leaving the cave was harder than I expected. My last night there, I sat alone, remembering everything. The first night when I was terrified and alone. The cougar standing in my doorway. Christmas Eve when the town finally accepted me. 14 people huddled together during the blizzard. Years of peace and purpose and slow healing. This cave made me who I am, I said out loud to the empty space. But I don't need it anymore. I left it intact, maintained as a way station for travelers. In my will, I specified it should be preserved. By 1945, 58 years after I built it, inspectors found the original timber still sound. Samuel's prediction about moisture rot had been wrong. Proper design and maintenance meant longevity. The final years were quieter. I took fewer consulting jobs, mentored younger builders, spent time with friends I'd made over decades. Thomas and I became close, 2 stubborn men who'd learned humility together. Joseph Crowfoot and I had a friendship that went deeper than words. We'd sit for hours without talking, comfortable in silence. He understood things about loss and solitude that most people couldn't. There might have been more between us, but neither of us needed to name it. Eleanor Flynn became like a sister. The woman who'd worried about the propriety of a man alone in the wilderness had become one of my staunchest defenders and closest friends. In 1917, at 64, I took on my last project, a young couple building their first home. I was old tired, but I agreed, one more. Final proof that the principle still worked. We finished in October, number 42, an even number, satisfying to an engineer's mind. The pneumonia hit that winter. Not from the cave. I was living in my house in town by then, just old lungs giving out. Doc Hensley said I was 65 and had lived a full life. He was right. The visitors came those last weeks. Eleanor holding my hand. Samuel bringing his latest drawings to share. Thomas now 82 and still alive with those 3 fingers sitting by my bed. You saved my life twice, he said. Once in the blizzard. Once by teaching me to stop being a fool. Joseph came last, sat in silence, finally spoke. The cave is still there. Someone will need it someday. Tell them, I whispered. Tell them to listen. The ground holds answers we've forgotten. And Joseph, thank you for bringing me back. From the cave, I mean. And from grief. I died February 3rd, 1918. Peaceful, surrounded by people I'd helped and who'd helped me. The obituary in the Silver Creek Register was brief. 42 earth-sheltered dwellings designed. 0 structural failures. 50 to 80% cost reduction. Lives saved. But numbers don't capture what mattered. I came to Montana to bury myself. The earth refused. It held me warm, kept me alive, and gave me purpose when I thought I had none left. For decades after Silver Creek thrived. By 1933, quarters of homes used earth shelter principles. Lowest heating costs in Montana. Healthiest population. The Depression hit them lighter because efficiency had built resilience. Then cheap energy came. Modern construction. The old ways were forgotten. My manual went out of print. Knowledge faded into curiosity, then obscurity, until the energy crisis of the 70s brought researchers back. University of Minnesota studies confirmed what I'd measured in 1887, 15 to 20 degrees warmer, 50 to 80% savings, the exact numbers. The technology wasn't new, just forgotten. Again, there's a photograph in the Montana archives. 1892, 11 people at my cave entrance. The survivors, everyone built with the earth after that. Everyone outlived their neighbors. The cave still stands. You can visit, feel the constant temperature. See limestone notches carved 137 years ago. The spring still flows. Always has, always will. But standing there, you'll feel the question I ask myself every day after Sarah died. Not why did we forget, but what will we remember? I built that cave to hide from grief. The earth used it to teach me that wisdom isn't fighting nature. It's listening close enough to hear what's already there. The ground remembers, holds heat, gives freely. We just have to be humble enough to learn. That's not engineering, that's survival, the kind that matters.